Hi everyone, my name's Geoff Hoffman. I'm a partner at Clayton Utz and I'm joined here today by Megan Williams, who's a Senior Associate. And we're here to talk to you about the Australian Government's new Register of Foreign Ownership of Australian Assets. The new register comes into effect on the 1st of July this year, and it's a quite fundamental change to the way that the foreign investment regime works here in Australia. And it's really important that foreign investors and foreign-owned companies understand these new reporting obligations, because they do create a number of new obligations and will be quite administratively onerous for a number of people. Megan?
Quick overview of what we'll go through today. First, we'll just go through what the new register is and who it will apply to. We'll then walk through the key types of transactions that investors will need to be aware of and notify. Then we'll explain how investors will go about reporting those transactions to the register. And finally, we'll just look at what the interaction is between the new register and the existing reporting obligations for foreign investors. So Geoff, you want to kick us off with details about the new register?
Thanks, Megan. So the new register, what is it? It introduces new reporting obligations for foreign persons. What's a foreign person? Well, it's foreign investors coming into Australia for the first time, including as a subset of that foreign government investors, so sovereign wealth funds and state-sponsored pension funds, but foreign investors generally. But also, importantly, includes Australian companies which are currently foreign-owned. So there's a very large number of organisations which are going to have obligations to report under this new register. There's a broad range of events that will need to be reported, so not just the initial investment, but because it's a register and needs to remain current, the obligations are not only to report the first investment, but also any changes in the nature of that investment, changes in holdings, and ultimately disposals in terms of those interests. And importantly, it's not limited to transactions for which FIRB approval was first obtained.
So another thing to note is that these new reporting obligations are completely separate to the existing requirements for investors to notify and seek approval for certain transactions from the Australian Treasurer. The new reporting obligations will come into effect from 1 July and they'll apply only to transactions that have taken place on or after that date, but it does apply regardless of when the FIRB approval was granted for the relevant transaction, if that's applicable. So if you do need to notify an event to the new register, generally you'll need to give notice within 30 days of the event taking place.
So to do a little bit more of a deep dive into what the reporting obligations are, the foreign investment regime applies to interests in entities and business assets on the one hand, and also interest in land. So looking first at how this new register will apply to investments in entities and businesses, the first thing to note is that in relation to entities and businesses, there is an alignment with the current foreign investment regime. So the obligations to make notifications and update the register apply to interests to which approval has been obtained or voluntarily sought, and so that, I suppose, creates a bit of a ring fence around the types of investments which need to be notified to the register. So the initial investment needs to be notified, but importantly, and this is new, changes of 5% or more in the interest also need to be notified to the register. So there's a continuing obligation to notify and update the register. And similarly, when the investor ceases to hold that interest, including if the target is wound up or if the business activities required to be notified cease to be carried on, or if the interests in the target are disposed of altogether, then the register needs to be updated by the investor to ensure it remains accurate.
So when it comes to interests in land that need to be reported to this new register, it's important to note that it's a much broader range of interests in land that need to be reported than what you currently need FIRB approval for. because it applies regardless of the value of the transaction. So there's no monetary thresholds applicable when reporting interests in land. The following types of land will need to be reported if you're acquiring an interest in freehold land, an Australian lease if it's likely to exceed 5 years or more, and also any interest in an Australian land corporation or trust, again, regardless of value. Similarly to entities and businesses, there are these ongoing obligations to report changes to the interest. So if there's any change to the nature of the land that you've reported, such as it was residential land and now it's become commercial land, that would need to be notified to the register. And then if you cease to hold the interest in land, the investor needs to report that to the register again. So this would include if the relevant lease has been terminated or if it simply expired, and any other disposals of the interest in land. There are a couple of other key reporting obligations that Geoff will take us through now.
So these two new reporting obligations need to be considered by investors. The first one applies to an entity which has become a foreign person. So let's take, for example, a large Australian target which is acquired by a foreign investor. As a result of that target becoming a foreign person, all of the interest in land and all of the businesses that have previously been acquired by that target entity, which would have needed to have been notified to the register had they occurred after they became a foreign person, will need to be notified. That could be a quite significant undertaking. If you can imagine large Australian corporation having to do a review of all of the leases over 5 years, all of the interest in freehold land that it has, and those then need to be notified to the register within 30 days of the completion of a transaction which causes it to become a foreign person. And then at the other end, if a company which is a foreign person ceases to be a foreign person, so if a foreign-owned private equity fund IPO'd a target and ceases to be foreign-owned, then all of those notifications that have previously been on the register then need to be removed. So they're going to be quite onerous obligations for companies to comply with.
So how will investors actually go about reporting these transactions to the register? This new register is going to be administered by the Australian Taxation Office, and they've set up this new online services portal for investors. So the investors themselves or their authorised advisors will be able to submit notices online through this new portal. In order to get access, both the foreign investors and their representative will need to apply for a MyGov ID, which is a unique digital identifier that's specific to an individual. Importantly, the foreign investor themselves will need to register for access to online services and complete a once-off registration via the portal before they can authorise their advisors to submit notices on their behalf. There aren't any fees payable for notifications to the register, but of course, if you're late in notifying or if you fail to notify, then there could be fines that apply.
So the other thing to mention is that some of you may be familiar with existing reporting regimes under our foreign investment regime. So we already have a register of residential land, a register of foreign ownership of agricultural land, and a register of foreign ownership of water entitlements. All of those are going to be repealed and then subsumed into this expanded register of foreign ownership of Australian assets. However, there are a number of regimes and reporting regimes which will continue. And so, for example, FIRB applications will need to be submitted to FIRB in the usual way, although they are updating their website. ACMA currently keeps a register of foreign ownership of media assets that will continue separately, and also the register of critical infrastructure assets, which is administered by the Cyber Infrastructure and Security Centre, will also continue.
So to wrap up, some resources that investors might find useful when it comes to looking at this new register. We've got on the slide, you'll see a link to our website. We've got a guide for foreign investment in Australia available. FIRB also publishes guidance notes on their website. As Geoff mentioned, they're updating their website and will have a new website from 1 July. And importantly, if you're submitting an application for approval, it will need to be done through that new website. The ATO has also got some useful information on their website on the details for the process of registering for access and the type of information that you'd need to include in a register notice as well.
Thanks, Megan. And so this new register, it's going to be quite a significant compliance burden for a number of companies and their advisors. And so hopefully this video will make that compliance burden a little easier by giving you a bit of an overview initially as to how it's intended to operate. Thank you.